to welcome Sean Duca to talk about security, right? And I think from Palo Alto, one of the leaders in security. So Sean, over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and really appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you today. So what I want to do is spend the next 20 or so minutes really sort of talking about and focusing on our cloud threat report that we recently sort of talked about. And in light of what we've actually seen over the last 15 months of the pandemic now, what this really meant around this big shift that we've actually seen out to public cloud. If I think about the first 10 months of the pandemic, we saw the greatest growth in terms of people adopting public cloud infrastructure than we'd actually seen compared to the previous 10 years. Just stop and think for a second. In a 10-month period, we saw more growth than we'd seen in the previous 10 years. And if you think about it right now, out of all the workloads that are actually out there, whether it be on-premise or in public cloud infrastructure, it's believed that it's somewhere in the order of about 10% of all of the workloads are currently sitting out in public cloud infrastructure. So just purely based on that, we still have not really even scratched the surface right now as to where we actually sort of see things popping up, where we see this is going to be a continual sort of growth area. We see more people really focusing on actually moving out to public cloud. But the thing is, like with every other cloud provider that's actually out there, they keep on talking about the fact that there's a shared responsibility. What you put into the cloud, you need to secure it. The cloud provider is actually there to provide security to their own infrastructure and their own platform itself. So let's dive into some of the findings that we actually got from the cloud threat report. So the cloud threat report was really sort of looking at pre and post COVID. So it was obviously information that we had sort of gleaned. Definitely urge you to download a copy of the report at cloudthreat.report/first half 21. Go through it and you can see a lot of the details in sort of more information, what's actually out there. But this is something we actually collected, and a lot of the analysis that was actually done by our threat intelligence group called Unit 42. And their job was to really sort of research and find out what are people actually doing out in public cloud infrastructure. So why this topic? And I think it's probably a couple of key things here. Firstly, we're seeing this big push out to cloud. And we already sort of talked about the fact that enterprises are quickly scaling out the cloud. They're spending more money in cloud. And we keep on seeing this increased growth quarter on quarter in terms of people moving out to public cloud. Like many of us here, and pretty much all of us are actually sort of sitting on the back of a Zoom link. This is kind of the norm of what we've actually seen in the last 15 months. But this also means that we've seen this radical shift of people constantly being out there. In some geographies, we're actually seeing that people are still permanently working out remotely. But the new norm is really around working from anywhere. And that whole hybrid workplace is something that we're going to keep on seeing evolving moving forward. Those workers are really sort of shifted out there, and it was an even playing field. Every single organization pretty much had to uproot and work at how to remotely scale a workforce overnight. And then the final key piece is obviously with sort of the pandemic sort of in the background there, cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Monero have all been gaining a lot of popularity and market value as well. The interesting part is every single time there is any type of cybersecurity challenge, take the example of ransomware, we're seeing people actually extorting money from organizations, and they're actually doing it with virtual currency. If you think back in the days where it could simply have been 5 years ago, the cost of the value of Bitcoin, I think back then was about $3,000 compared to $50,000-$60,000 that actually is today. If you're doing ransomware or doing any type of cybercrime activities back then, you've actually been sitting on a pretty penny that's actually exponentially grown. So we're seeing this constantly sort of shifting and changing in terms of what people are actually doing on a regular basis. Cloud growth itself, and obviously the security instance, we're seeing this massive sort of uptick each time. And obviously with that growth that's coming out, we're seeing more and more challenges coming out. And in particular, when you start to look at the cloud accounts, what that really focusing on is the fact that the biggest threat that we see right now is really around the fact that the identity and access management piece around accessing cloud workloads is really the part that compromises a lot of organizations. They're simply being compromised because of the fact that they are just simply giving the keys to the kingdom away to too many people inside their own organization. They're focusing on really giving access to everyone as opposed to really trying to work out, let's do the authentication, let's do the authorization, let's actually start to do some extra checks and balances. If someone actually does not need it, are we actually revoking some of those challenges that are actually out there? But we just keep on seeing this shift time and time again of people really sort of going out and not focusing on some of those key issues. And if you think about when the pandemic actually started, what's actually sort of going on right now, there's a lot of different things. It only took 2 days after the pandemic really started before every single cyber attacker around the world started to leverage it. They never waste an opportunity to focus on or waste an opportunity in terms of actually trying to launch their attacks. Within 2 days of the pandemic really sort of starting worldwide, we saw that every single internet scanner that was actually out there, that was actually used by them, was actually poking and prodding all of our home routers, because they knew that we're sitting at home. They're trying to work out what are the exposures and vulnerabilities that exist on those routers. So this is something that they know that we're sort of sitting at home, and that's what they're actually looking at. Obviously, the surge started to see this growth, and no doubt has actually continued from this point and will continue as we see time sort of move on forward. The top COVID cloud security instance worldwide really was around the fact that we just saw a number of different systems that were actually out there. It was staggering to find out what some of the things that were actually seen in terms of the percentage growth. The more shocking part for me was really around the fact that we saw 2 key things. The words unencrypted and database for me were just like gobsmacked. Why we've actually got things that are still unencrypted today blows my mind. And it's a question that many people should actually be asking themselves and asking, do you actually have unencrypted systems inside your own organization? And it's not simply to protect it from prying eyes. It's an easy way for an attacker to come in. And then when you start to look at the databases, which are really our way to actually store vast amounts of information publicly accessible to the internet. Sure, there is a reason for some of that, but some of them don't even really need to be connected at all. We saw port scans obviously going up, and organizations really need to have this ability where they're simply looking at the governance of what actually is out there. And if something does change, how do I automatically am aware of what's going on? And this is where we really need to think about how do we shift focus and our lens around the problem that's actually out there. The reason why we move out to public cloud, first and foremost, is the fact that we want to leverage the agility, the elasticity, the way that we can start to scale up at a dramatic pace. And that really is through the use of automation. But when for security comes in, we've always typically had this notion of let's insert a security person to do some of the work. That only overwhelms security teams. And the essence really is it's probably going to slow down cloud. And this is where we can see people bypassing security to really try to achieve that. And that's where security can actually be done in an automated way, scaling at the same pace and speed that everything else is actually doing in cloud. And that's what we need to be thinking about. How do we actually do this? If we have a look from the industry perspective, right now, the industries that are seeing the greatest growth around cloud workloads, it's pretty much everyone. We're seeing this more and more. You know, chemical manufacturing, government, and some of these industries have seldom ever really wanted to use public cloud at the best of times. But March 16th last year really took a turning point for many of us where we just said, it has to go to digital. And let's just simply move en masse and quickly get out there. So these are the largest ones that we're actually seeing in terms of seeing the greatest growth. But en masse, every single vertical has really pivoted and moved out to public cloud infrastructure. But then when you start to drill a little bit deeper, this is where you can start to see retail, 402% people moving out to cloud. The greatest amount of money that was probably spent during the last 15 months has probably been from retail. Then you start to look at some of the other the other things that we're actually seeing out there. And again, this is just a continual shift of trends of the industries with the greatest increases in security instances, but then at the same time, where are they targeting? The people that have actually moved out onto cloud first and foremost. Retail, everyone's doing e-commerce. So let's actually target that. Manufacturing, we saw as in the previous slide, you saw a big amount of growth there. Everyone's focusing on that because we're not thinking about how do we secure the information that we've actually put into public cloud. And then if you start to think about the industries that do better than others in terms of enabling critical controls, you know, again, this is where we're actually starting to see some key challenges, you know, around sort of the logging piece, access keys. You know, today, Palo Alto Networks, we have to be quicker than the attackers can actually be. And if someone was to inadvertently upload to a GitHub style repository some code they want to actually share out with the rest of the world, and inadvertently people actually were to upload their AWS access keys, at that point, we believe that it probably takes an attacker about 4 minutes to identify that and automatically gain access to your AWS infrastructure or AWS estate. So your security needs to be faster than 4 minutes. That's actually a real world statistic because that's something at Palo Alto Networks that we actually look at. And we have an automated way to try and identify that actually happening. And if you think, what are the chances that people actually upload AWS access keys? Happens all the time. Many organizations, not our organization, but you can definitely see that there's challenges here. To prioritize around data recovery, you know, again, telecommunications, we're all using telecom infrastructure, you know, and we're seeing some of these challenges actually taking place on a fairly regular basis. Rotating keys. As soon as I actually upload my AWS key and it was actually going to appear on GitHub, I need to be able to rotate those keys as quick as I possibly can. And obviously you need to ensure that I've got all the logging capability that's actually turned on. When I start to look at some of the specifics around COVID-19 and data security itself, from this point, we can start to see where is the actual types of infomails. And the very good news here is 0.01% of the cloud storage that we'd surveyed contained malware. But that's not to say that it's just all a malware problem. It's more a case of what else is actually being stored in cloud. And sometimes it could actually be inadvertently sharing information. This is where it could actually become more of a data loss issue, because we're starting to think about, what else could be out there. 64% of all data contains sensitive information. If we're moving out en masse, we simply could be moving out all confidential information as well as unclassified information as well. So again, what are we actually putting out there? From what we found, 69% contains personally identifiable information. 34%, which is more scary, contains intellectual property. This is open, available shares and stores that we're actually seeing out there. And this is simply from the data that we actually surveyed. So what does this really mean? 30% are all public access to sensitive data, no authorization required. Simply by me doing searches, and I could start to examine and look to see what type of S3 buckets someone could actually have, what type of data stores are actually out there with no authorization or authentication actually turned on. 30% of that can easily be accessed. And again, what are we doing about this one? And this is where the finding is that for me is actually quite shocking, that given that anyone with the right URL can access this without any type of password or with other types of authentication, it's actually out there. Now, if we dig a little bit deeper, cloud, we're focusing on cryptocurrency itself. So if you have a look at the Monero, obviously is one of the most common forms of payment for any type of cybercrime activity. I'm not trying to say that Monero is a cybercrime cryptocurrency, but it's one that's actually being favored right now from a mining perspective. You can just actually see the price that's actually sort of going on right now for Monero itself. The number of connections that actually take place to do the mining. So Monero is what's actually considered a privacy coin. If you don't want to be tracked, this is your go-to for illicit cryptocurrency or crypto jacking. It also allows, it's almost done completely with Monero. Excuse me. The Monero mining connection significantly outperforms that of other crypto mining operations. And this is where we saw a combined average of about 1% of the total network connections were taken up simply just by mining the Monero coin itself. Due to their inefficiencies in cloud-based CPUs and GPUs for doing the mining operations and negative cost-benefit ratio, any network connection to these mining pools from enterprise cloud infrastructure should be considered highly suspicious. We've seen en masse that some organizations have actually got some of the mining software actually running in their own environments. That means that someone has actually gone into your environment, compromised your systems, installed their tools to actually go off and use your server power to actually go off and do the mining. This is something that was actually quite shocking to see. From the crypto jacking side of it, we've seen this obviously starting to decline. And this is where it really focuses on the use of crypto jacking is really around sort of that unauthorized use of infrastructure for crypto mining. As I sort of mentioned a little bit earlier, someone actually breaks inside my organization, uses my servers and systems, install their tools, and they simply go out and start to use that for the ability to actually go out and mine tools. It's getting harder and harder to mine. And that's why I think partly the reason why we're seeing this decline, but it's not to say that it has completely disappeared either. So what do we need to do to stop it? We always talk about risk management as being a key thing around, do we either accept it, avoid it, mitigate it, or if there's a way that we could actually transfer. At the end of the day, transfer does not necessarily mean let's transfer accountability to someone else. You could transfer some responsibility around some of the risk that's actually out there, but you're never really shifting out accountability. Mitigation for me is where I really sort of come in and say, for organizations that don't really invest in automation around cloud governance, that's really keeping eyes on the screen to work out, is there something wrong? If my developers are actually pushing out code 1 million times a day through their CI/CD pipelines, I need to ensure that I've got some form of governance to ensure that it's the right thing that's going on. I've got guardrails in place to ensure that the right type of code's actually going out there. They're not deviating too far off the balance. And when we start to think about the total amount of workloads, less than 5% of the global IT spend is actually in cloud at this point. And that's going to substantially change in the coming years. And this is just simply from Andy Jassy, the CEO of Amazon Web Services. Think about that for a second. Excuse me. We talked about the fact that in the first 10 months of the pandemic, we saw the largest growth that we'd ever seen in the previous 10 years moving out to public cloud infrastructure. Today, 10% of all workloads are currently sitting out in public cloud infrastructure, but only less than 5% of global IT spend is going to cloud. More has to be done here, and not just simply around cloud itself and cloud adoption, because that will no doubt continue. But we need to start thinking about how do we secure all these workloads, because they effectively are some of the key things that we need to think about. Now, for me, when I start to think about the big five of what is it that we need to think about, of what is best in class when it comes to securing cloud, and that really is around get deep cloud visibility. I need to be able to see it. I need to be able to see everything that's running across all clouds. It's standard today that multi-cloud is the de facto standard that we actually see inside organizations. No one is really in a uni-cloud environment or an omni-cloud environment where it's just Microsoft or it's just Amazon or Google. Usually it's probably two, sometimes even more. And so you need to have visibility across every single one of those cloud service providers that are actually out there, and including what you're doing in private cloud infrastructure. You need to be able to set some sort of security guardrails. That's really around what is it that I actually believe to be allowed and something that should actually only happen inside my own organization. Then the next key piece from there is really adopt a standard. What is it that I actually want to ensure that it can only happen inside my own environments? Any deviations from those standards, I need to be able to be aware of it and do something about it. I need to be able to train and hire security engineers who can code. This is where we need to ensure that that DevSecOps piece really does come together, where security is really intrinsically part of that process of making sure that coders are actually sort of building the code the way that it should be and embed that piece into the DevOps process. So how does Prisma Cloud actually help here? Prisma Cloud for us is the platform of choice that is natively built out to really secure that journey for an organization to really go from that whole lift and shift out to public cloud to really securing everything they're doing out there. So provide the visibility around that cloud security posture management, monitor and detect all the different types of threats, maintain compliance around what's going on. Workload protection. It's pretty much a uniform standard these days that any application that's being built in the cloud is going to be built in containers. More mature organizations are starting to build it out in serverless compute power. And again, we need to be able to understand this, whether it's infrastructure as code, to secure each of those workloads that are actually out there. The network security piece is really gaining visibility and providing that micro segmentation and securing the trust boundaries. I need to understand what one workload is doing to another, but also who are the users inside those workloads and what are they doing? And the final key piece is really enforcing permissions around what people can do in the cloud. This is that identity and access management piece for what you can do in public cloud. Prisma Cloud can basically monitor all of your workloads across all those cloud service providers to allow you to achieve that. And this really came by Palo Alto Networks going through an acquisition spree and at the same time taking products off the market, taking out the relevant code pieces and bringing it all together. I've worked in security now for 21 years and I'm thankful to actually work with an organization that's actually taken the time to buy the best solutions and capabilities that every organization will actually need out in public cloud. But they basically start off first with Evident.io. They bought it and they saw it was purely focused on an AWS problem. Next step, they went off and acquired Redlock, which was really looking at that multi-cloud problem. We then started to build out that Prisma Cloud capability, and a lot of that code base was based on Redlock. We ported all of the code in 32 days over to the Redlock platform. The next acquisition was PureSec and Twistlock, which really focused on serverless compute security and container-based security. Within 3 months, we had ported all of the relevant code pieces to the Prisma Cloud platform. And then Appareto was actually acquired. And after a couple of months, all of that code was actually moved over to the Prisma Cloud platform again. One agent, one single management user interface to really make it easy to onboard and help an organization mature through that process to go from cradle to grave effectively around what they really want to be doing in public cloud infrastructure. So this is where we can start to go through that process of really getting early on in that life cycle. Through the build phase itself, integrating directly with a number of different tools that are part of the CI/CD pipeline. Integrating itself, doing all the checks and balances, making sure that we can actually start to identify any challenges, vulnerabilities that could actually exist in the code that's actually being rolled out. Put it in something like Jenkins, where it can actually start to manage and implement that whole workflow process. Prevent any insecure deployments from actually taking place, while at the same time, still providing that visibility and governance across every single thing that's going on inside the environment. So a key piece for us is really making sure that it is cloud native. And this is something that we were born in the cloud. We keep on building out the capability in the cloud. And for us, it's not going to be one of those things that we're ever going to stop sort of focusing on that part. Every organization has to go through, and today is probably using about 10 different tools to really solve that challenge. So with that, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and present to you today. But if you'd like to find out some more information about Prisma Cloud, please go to paloaltonetworks.com, and more than happy to actually provide you with any information and cover any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. That is absolutely very insightful, especially in the arena of security. A lot of questions that's been flagged. So in interest time, I'll just pick on one. I think you started the conversation by saying that the concept of shared responsibility, I think there's still a lot of view held in the industry that as long as I put it into AWS or Azure or GCP, then my data is going to be secure. And you touched upon shared responsibility. Maybe you can just give us a little bit more insight on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the key thing is, and I think AWS have probably got it in their third slide. So whenever they talk about moving out to the AWS platform, the third slide actually talks about the shared responsibility model. So they will basically provide you with, whether it's infrastructure as a service, even platform as a service, they're just simply providing that compute, network, and storage, and they're providing that to you. But then you're going to build your applications, you're going to build your code base. If it's platform as a service, they're obviously managing a lot of the platform itself, but it's the information that you're putting in there, so your data. So think about the context of, let's just say like a CRM, a contact relation management system. All that information that you're putting in there, that needs to be protected. That's not an option that you can actually get natively built into those cloud providers. Or if it is, you need to be able to manage it. And then when you start to do something in AWS, then you go to Google's platform, GCP, or you go to Microsoft, there are 3 different consoles that you have to go through. But the crux of it is, as you start to move into cloud, everything that you put in there, your own information, that's the thing that's of value, intrinsic value to your own business. You have to secure it. And this is where, I guess, the proposition that we've come from is we've got one platform to make it consistent security across all of that.
That's great. I think I just picked another 2 more questions. One of the other questions from Edison Tai is, what would be the top and key security controls you would advise an organization to strengthen or assess in order to get better assurance of not being cloud for their data strategy? So it's really top security controls.
Yeah, look, top security control for me, one is going to be something that's going to provide some sort of posture management, so some sort of visibility. If I can't see it, I can't control it, I can't enforce any type of policy. So for me, first and foremost, that's a big thing. The other one is really going to be around having some sort of governance around the identity. We are seeing people en masse getting compromised because they've simply just got open connections that are actually sort of running on the system, or an account that's not really controlled. There's no MFA that's turned on or something to that effect. So I think for me, those would be 2 things. A tool that actually could give me visibility across all the multi-clouds that are actually out there, but then some sort of entitlement management. Someone that can actually start to tell me, why have I over-provisioned a particular account more so than something else? And if it's an account that's not being used, why haven't I revoked the account itself? Great.
Last question. There's one about work from home and the definition of perimeter. I think the whole perimeter security definition has changed because you've got the whole workforce perimeter working remote. How does Palo Alto, how do you see the definition of perimeter now?
Yeah, look, so I guess I'll use sort of an analogous story here. One of the most common things that I probably heard of the last couple of years was, the perimeter is dead. And kind of scoff at that one a little bit, because I just think the perimeter is not dead. We've got perimeters. It's plural. We're in many places right now. We've got probably data islands everywhere. So I think the context of need to understand where your data actually is and securing that. So that's one part. And I think you really need to think about what's the value of the data you've got and actually puts the right relevant controls around it. From a working from home standpoint, we need to ensure that, or working from anywhere really, we need to ensure that we've got the right level of security controls that's always on, always there, and always starts to secure what people are doing. For years we used VPNs, and sometimes I think probably a lot of people struggled during the start of the pandemic. But the key thing is there's technology now that you start to think about, well, what are the applications that I'm using? Do I need to be going back to my corporate headquarters? Probably not, because I'm using Office 365, I'm using Zoom, I'm using all these other systems. Well, if they're all sitting out in public cloud, because I'm consuming it as a service, it makes sense that I should also be consuming my ability to actually secure and also connect to all these platforms from the cloud as well. So shifting it out to the edge. And that's where you've seen people like, Gartner have come out with talking about SASE, or Secure Access Service Edge, as like the new trend where network and security are really sort of converged together. Palo Alto Networks has got a platform called Prisma Access that really focuses on actually providing that always on connectivity. Effectively, firewall as a service is probably the best way to think about it. That for me, I think we've seen the biggest growth ever in the last 15 months, just purely on that platform alone.
Fantastic. So thank you, Sean.